The phenomenon of the illusion of time unfurling looks to the average person like a flat landscape heading in a straight line toward a mysterious and uncertain future. This is not, however, how history would describe itself. From a much longer perspective, the unfurling of time could be more accurately characterized as a spiraling series of cycles within cycles, endlessly repeating and expanding. Like the seasons of the year, the great revolving eons come and go in perfect rhythm with nature, as each period presents its unique challenges and lays out scenarios of great importance for the maturation of the earth and the consciousness of the inhabitants thereupon. Instead of winter, spring, summer, and fall, however, time might present occasions of optimism, expansion, inevitably leading to unraveling and collapse, repeating and repeating as time moves forward. Although ominously predictable on the one hand, time presents extreme shifts where cataclysmic events radically reshape the future. On occasion, these calamities are climatological, like extended droughts, famines, or floods. Other radical changes flow from the rise and fall of great empires, or radical technological discoveries or losses. Still others are conceptual and spring from the mind of mankind themselves. Often these set in place beliefs, values, or fears that totally transform the nature of human lived experience from the inception of the idea onward. One such author of thoughts and ideas that created cataclysmic shifts in human consciousness was the ancient prophet known as Zoroaster, the Greek rendering of the Persian name Zarathustra. His intervention and his transformational impact on humanity happened so long ago that the exact time period of his life and teaching has sunken beneath the murky depths of obscurity. Many estimates place him as having been born around 628 BCE and dying somewhere in the neighborhood of 551 BCE. Some scholars posit, however, that he could have lived more than 1,700 years prior to those dates. When he lived is of little importance to the focus of this discussion, however. The impact that he had on religion, politics, the definition of good moral character, and in short, what it means to be human, lives as part of us to this day. Zoroaster's and the rulers that followed his teachings had a major impact on the beliefs of Judaism and therefore the entire rollout of the Abrahamic religions, whose influence dominates the world landscape to this day. Zoroaster's teachings emanate from a time in history when a pantheon of gods monitored human behavior. The concept of the devil, if it were held at all, constituted simply a playful opposition to virtue. Fatalism and destiny directed the actions of mankind, and the blatant inhumanity of authority dominated governments throughout the world. In this setting, Zoroaster's teachings gave us four major revisions that radically changed what it means to be human and altered the course of human consciousness from that time forward. First, he implanted the notion of only one single God that was worthy of worship above all others. This God, that he called Ahura Mazda, allegedly created the universe and could have been patterned after the Brahma, the supreme creative cosmic spirit in Hinduism, although Zoroaster greatly personified his portrayal of this force in his god. Second, by creating or recognizing the righteous polarizing force, a supreme God of good, he also birthed this entity's dualistic opposite, the ultimate evil character that he called Angramanyu, the destructive spirit, roughly translated as angry mind. Certainly the notion of good as opposed to bad existed before Zoroaster, but his articulation of these entities, their characteristics and intentions, supercharged the clash between these forces. Thus he articulated the dualism and polarization of that dualism between God and the devil that has dominated human consciousness for at least the last 2,000 years. Third, he gave credence to the notion of free will, an idea that ran counter to the tribal nature of mankind that had prevailed throughout history to that time. Fatalism formed the basis for reasoning and explained the outflow of destiny for persons and civilizations down through time. Therefore, being born carried with it a certain path or fate for that individual to live out during his time on this earth. Some were destined to be wealthy and powerful, whereas others, inevitably, as their circumstance dictated, were doomed to live in poverty or perhaps as a slave. Heroes were born and their heroic deeds predestined to happen. Leaders and entire nations simply played out what might be called, quote, a divine plan, end quote, for their earthly existences. To Zoroaster, the notion of free will carried with it the responsibility for right action, based upon learned wisdom. And no delineation of right and wrong would be complete without a final judgment and a proper receptacle for the righteous and another for the immoral. Thus he birthed a form of heaven and hell, offering an incentive for good deeds and a disincentive for destructive actions. It should be mentioned that according to the prophet, destructive thoughts, words, and deeds inspired by the dark force, Angramanyu, also caused misery during one's earthly incarnation, as well as in the afterlife. The fourth idea flowing from the legacy of Zoroaster was that of a just form of government, allied with human needs in harmony. This notion of a just system of government was subsequently actualized through rulers that followed his teachings, like Cyrus the Great and Darius the Great. They promoted the revolutionary idea of individual human freedom of choice, which made up a necessary ingredient for the newly emerging free will-based humanity. With these innovations to his credit, emerging at this pivotal time in history, one might theorize that Zoroaster played a central role in the transformation of human consciousness from the third age of man to our currently experienced fourth age. The third age might best be characterized as humanity being immersed in dogma and ritual. People during this time lived a life dominated by conformity, dogma, and tradition. Within these confines, and having little control over their circumstances, it seemed that humanity existed to appease the gods, to simply be worthy of life's necessities. The wisdom of tribal orthodoxy, acquiescence to strength of authority, playing proper assigned familial roles, and black and white thinking around the importance of conventionality defined the experience of human consciousness during the third age of man. It may be the case that Zoroaster ushered in the ideas that eventually would populate the mind of the newly emerging human of the Fourth Age, one where independence, right moral action, and the free choice between good and evil set in play the lessons for consciousness that we are currently playing out on the world stage. Interestingly, at this current point in history, if we awaken and find the wisdom that Zoroaster employed us to seek, we occupy the perfect position to observe, learn, and take actions to resolve our dilemmas as this fourth episode of the evolution of man winds down and succumbs to the logical eventualities set in motion possibly 3,500 years ago by a brilliant thinker named Zoroaster.
This acceptance of this responsibility becomes the way of life. And you have the view of the world. The world is a moral reality, your way of life. Act with good thought, good words, and good deeds. And you have accepted the doctrine of Zarathustra. Now, the interesting thing here is, contrary to the tribal notion, this is a decision to accept this way of life, this vision and this way of life. It's a purely individual matter. In one of the verses of the Gatha, Zarathustra says, I talk to each of you. Listen with care and with careful thought, and make a judgment, each individual by individual, man and woman. Why does he say this? He distinguishes it from the tribal conception, where each individual didn't think for himself or herself. The tribe made the decision. If you're a member of the tribe, that's what you did. But here, each one is asked to make the decision, and each one is asked to bear the responsibility for that decision. You choose to live in this way, or you don't. And thus, what we have is a shift from the tribal to the individual, which has sometimes been called the First Enlightenment, and recognition that you have to take the responsibility for what you do. And this is at the heart of it. It must have been a very strikingly different teaching. To us it appears rationally clear, but in a tribal society, this appears strange.
3,500 years ago, the dynamics between good and evil and between gods and humanity functioned very differently than they do today. The concepts of good versus evil were not so explosive or toxic as they seem to be now, where it appears that reason has taken a back seat to belief, and irrationality threatens to destroy mankind. Back in the beginning of this current age, around the time of Zoroaster, man worshipped a variety of gods and supernatural entities, each with a unique personality, a different area of influence or power, and particular behavior patterns that matched their sometimes bizarre temperaments. These various entities, fairies, gods, angels, nymphs, and the like, frequently interacted with humanity and behaved within a sliding scale of ethics, which had much more in common with the more basic instincts of mankind than actions expected of a deity. Legends of various transgressions by gods and other entities against mankind were common during this age. It seemed as if the only being in the drama that displayed any responsibility or sense of morality at all were the lowly humans who saw their roles as simply being in service to the gods, no matter how unreasonable their deistic behaviors would become. Although most of these collections of deities at the time had one or more gods designated as a type of dominant god or goddess, the idea of the worship of only one deity, as propounded by Zoroaster, appeared as a concept so foreign that it would demand the full extent of his charismatic personality to speak this concept into being. Zoroaster considered his god, Ahura Mazda, as the only god worthy of worship, which seems simple enough when first considering the idea, but the extremely revolutionary nature and paradigm-changing effect of this shift is still echoing down through time, and the effects are being felt in a major way to this day. Before this radical concept gripped the world, conquering tribes like the Aztecs, Inca, Persian, and Roman empires routinely absorbed the gods of the conquered tribes into their overarching pantheon of deities. This was done as a strategic military maneuver to appease the newly subjugated peoples and quell their resistance to the new ruler's military occupation and, of course, superimposed tax slavery. But as it would turn out, as the fourth age of man moved forward, the one God concept would prove to be a much more powerful method of suppression and enslavement than the incorporation of more gods into the collections of the new federation. But how does a collection of concepts manifest in the world in such a powerful way as to dramatically alter the course of history and shift the subsequent evolution of human consciousness? The answer is through thoughts spoken into reality. One must never underestimate the power of the logos, or spoken word, for the creation of new realities with which evolving consciousness must grapple. In Genesis 1:3-5, we see the initial example of creation by utterance. In this passage, we witness naming as a form of delineation, creating the desired thing. But also within this utterance, the Creator is defining the surrounding state of not being, which is the quality of not being the named object or verb. This naming process generates the opposite of the created entity. In this example, his creation of the day automatically defined night, the quality of not being day. In other words, when a word is spoken into existence, the concept separates itself from everything else and becomes a definite article or action. This explains the ultimate creative process, not just for the Creator God, but also for mankind, as we are also gifted or perhaps cursed with language. This process is further explained by perhaps a contemporary of Zoroaster, the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, in his famous treatise, the Tao Te Ching. And so, as in all things, Zoroaster, in creating, delineating, conceptualizing, or finding Ahura Mazda, he most assuredly and knowingly created his opposite, the adversary, the polarization of evil and destructive behavior, known as Angra Manu. This dynamic picture of good versus evil, coupled with Zoroaster's new concept of free will, as opposed to the normal Third Age fatalism and preordained destiny, set in place the playing field, the rules of engagement, and the dilemmas to be faced for the Fourth Age of mankind. With these three elements in place, the good God, the bad devil, and the dynamic of humanity's free choice between the two, the defining process for our current reality lay in wait for human consciousness to work through, understand, grapple with, and perhaps ultimately overcome. Like in all moral dilemmas, the idea is to choose correctly between good and evil, and therefore to be in a position to receive a positive reward in the form of an escape from death and a life that is more worthwhile. Or, on the other hand, ending up in a hellish environment full of everlasting torture and torment for choosing poorly. This should be an easy task, or an easy choice for evolving consciousness on this new playing field. But there is a catch. The complicating factor employed so masterfully by Angra Manu is the Darush, or the big lie, or the inversion. Although Zoroaster's teaching clearly represent a path to righteousness, the devil and his demons constantly intervene and cloud the minds of mankind with massive deceptions, powerful deceivers, and seductive paths to an evil life lined with riches, accolades, fame, and fortune. Therefore, the struggle we are seeing being played out on this current stage involves the consciousness and will of mankind to awaken while wrestling with lies and deceptions conceived by powers beyond this reality. The answer to this dilemma, as communicated by Zoroaster to the world at the onset of this fourth age of man, obviously involves learning and researching what is true and what are deceptions, striving to live in harmony and peace, and, of course, resisting and defeating the devil both internally and externally. Just as an aside to be covered in more depth in subsequent videos, the idea of the evolution of consciousness has been largely removed from the commonplace mindset of Western civilization. This incredibly useful concept when approaching life has been submerged far below general awareness because it's at odds with the interests of the dominating forces in the world today. Concepts dealing with consciousness evolution and the development of profound human wisdom does not fit in with the controller's idea of hive mind and mankind's insertion within it. This hive mind idea clearly represents a threat leading to the devolution of mankind's free will and an entrapment within a controlling container currently being referred to as artificial intelligence. This violation of natural law seems to loom at odds with the natural progression of expanding awareness that's possible within each individual and within all of us collectively. In a cyclical view of time, we are bounded by beginnings and endings, strung together in such a manner as one aspect or season sets the stage for the other. Skipping parts of a cycle is generally not experienced, just as night could not be left out of the night-day cycle, or youth somehow not preceding adulthood. Cycles present a new look, a new experience, all within the knowing that nothing is permanent. Everything changes, and no matter what season you are living through, it will end with a new cycle beginning. Each aspect of any cycle presents opportunities and dilemmas, the solving of which forms the basis for challenges emerging in the upcoming season. Just as Ahura Mazda gives us new days to work on perfecting what he would call the bountiful mind, it also affords Angra Mainyu new opportunities to confound mankind with situational problems designed to defeat us or perhaps improve us. There is no doubt that Zoroaster's devil was created to be the heart of evil and the element with which mankind must cope. But considering that devils are generally a creation of the divine creator God, it may be that this sinister exterior hides a higher purpose. This doesn't mean that it is advisable to join forces with the dark side, but suggests something even more challenging. It means overcoming and controlling the evil, both within us and external to us. That objective could have been put in place for our development. As one who understands the drama of consciousness on the material plane, the famous psychologist Carl Jung writes about the subject of the devil. The real purpose of the antagonist is always to present a challenge to the protagonist. In every drama, the scenario unfolds the same way: the setup, the dilemma, and the resolution. Without the adversary, the play lacks interest, conflict, and intention, all necessary for any melodrama to be worthwhile and hold your attention. In the famous play Faust by Johann von Goethe, the devil, going by the old name Mephistopheles, explains his role clearly. When asked who he is, he explains, quote, "I am part of the power which eternally wills evil and eternally works good." Far from being a play or a game, however, we grapple every day with an evil force that appears to be bent on the total destruction of mankind and all the natural elements on our earth. So then we have the complete model with all the elements needed for the drama to proceed. We have the divine creator set up to be the ultimate good, final judge and administrator of justice. The figure of the prophet, Zoroaster, playing the role of the advisor, coach, and link between the God of good and humanity. And then Angra Mainyu, the extreme evil master of deceit and corrupter of humanity, with his ultimate weapon, the Deluge, which is the inversion of truth. And then, of course, there's the human consciousness, destined to be both the objective of the development and the subject of the torture. The outcome of this struggle depends on consciousness overcoming the deception that keeps us prisoner of the fourth age and finding truth. Here in the thick of the fourth age drama, we've come to understand much more about Angra Mainyu as our experience with him unfolds. Zoroaster's devil represents pure evil in both an objective form outside of our person and a subjective form that we must wrestle with internally. Our dogged insistence on punishing and blaming the external manifestations of this evil in terms of certain persons who obviously are completely immersed in the service of the dark force is beneficial, but only to a limited degree. The real revelation that could work to finally tame this destructive force and help us practice the knowledge and wisdom encapsulated in the learnings for this age is the realization that we are all partially responsible for the success of evil in the world. This ambient evil corrupts us all, poisons our harmonious thoughts, and seduces us to join forces with Angra Mainyu for our ultimate demise. Paul Levy, in his landmark book, Dispelling Wetiko, explains the character of the malevolence operating within human consciousness today. Many native cultures view this manifestation of evil as a similar malady lodged within the core of our consciousness or our psyche. Of course, many will deny the transcendental, omnipresent nature of our disease and insist that if a few key figures in government or industry were eliminated, humankind would again return to a state of wellness. Well, the history of the Fourth Age tells a different story and is a showcase of the futility of unseating and reseating revolving corruption. A common pattern is one of removing individuals external to us who have been determined by us to be the source of our misery. Countless governments have been overthrown, villains have been exposed, and entire nations have been decimated, labeled as evil empires or the axis of evil. Fighting this evil by striking out at the other is like smashing the mirror on a bad hair day. It helps nothing except deflecting any type of blame away from the demons within us. Seduced by the element of the dark force, we march in service to the devil and his drive to eliminate humanity. Our current unfolding of mankind has been destroyed either partially or completely in the past on several occasions. We've been decimated by extreme cold, sun activities, and floods. But if we continue on our current course, this will be the first time our species will destroy itself and all the life around it. Perhaps other groups of unfolding consciousness have destroyed themselves, as demonstrated by very ancient evidence of nuclear explosions. But this, if we allow it to happen, will be the first time for us, our class. When we begin to wake up to our involvement, then and only then can we stop our demise from happening. It may be a worthwhile exercise to determine how we, individually, are enabling the ambient evil to destroy us. Maybe you pay taxes to corrupt hegemonic governments, type electronic memos for large corporations, dabble in the stocks of companies openly making humanity sick, work with Google or YouTube to censor the truth, collude with the mass media in spreading lies, support universities that teach people not to think, or administer pharmaceuticals to unsuspecting patients. Maybe you're in the Army or TSA or other alphabet agency that do the bidding of the great evil and operate covertly against the rights of humanity. No matter how small your involvement, you are enabling Angra Manu to destroy the future. It's up to each of us to diagnose our involvement in our mutual destruction and turn away from aiding them and work to transform ourselves into beings deserving of the wisdom offered to our age by the Creator God and his antagonist minion, Angra Manu. The strategies that have a chance of releasing us from this lesson, a lesson that unfortunately will get progressively louder and more torturous as we progress through time, may be seen as threefold. First, we must realize that we are consciousness. Perhaps a better way of phrasing it is we as an entity is consciousness. This is our lesson. Second, we must see that we are both the problem and the solution. Humans build and fly the planes that spray dangerous geoengineering chemicals. Humans enforce tax laws that fund murder and violence. Seeing our involvement and stopping it is the second strategy for release. Third, a mass awakening of all thinking humans to the deluge in all of its form all around us must happen. Humanity must learn to research, to think, and to find truth. The deluge, through mainstream media, the political establishment, religious indoctrination, or simply through convenience devices, will put you in service to the devil and his army of demons, waiting to corrupt our thoughts, influence your words, which will be lies, and enlist you in warring against the future of the world on behalf of Angra Mainyu. Of course, at first, these strategies will have the effect of focusing on those thoroughly immersed and captured by Angra Mainyu, and removing them from positions where their deceptions can continue to destroy mankind. It will also render these individuals and the organizations that they work through helpless as humankind awakens and walks away from participating in our own destruction. Collectively, we will find that the inversion of reality caused by the deluge will melt under the strong light of truth, harmony, and simply refusing to be stupid any longer, working for our own destruction. Order will emerge from chaos when our minds reject lies and begin to think and speak the truth. Correct thoughts transformed into spoken truths that beget right action. With at least 1,000 years of influence of this dark force, our history has been stolen and rewritten. Our values and morals have been bastardized, and we have lost touch with the power of our thoughts, words, and deeds in shaping our reality. The Angra Mainyu, coupled with colluding humanity, has rendered us mad. Not surprisingly, the one translation of Angra Mainyu is the angry mind. We have simply driven ourselves mad. We have been conditioned to accept as normal war, lack of resources, impoverishment, homelessness, tax slavery, total surveillance of all aspects of life, no privacy, and many other symptoms of a mad society. Unfortunately, our colluding with the structure, funding, and functioning of this madness has become transparent to us. We cannot see our participation in our collective demise. Since we seldom bother to look in the mirror to diagnose or self-reflect our real position in this struggle, we can see it only in others, and our critical role is invisible to us. Blaming does no good for the development of consciousness and our increased wisdom. It only holds us in the drama of us and them, us good, them evil, that has mankind missing the total picture and stuck in a cul-de-sac of futility and frustration. We must stop blaming. It's a futile behavior, very characteristic of the pattern of the fourth age of man, that will seem ridiculous to us in the future. We are human consciousness. We are experiencing increasingly louder and more forceful lessons from a source that we cannot defeat, since it's likely created for our own benefit. Collectively, we will eventually move on to the fifth age, where new challenges will be presented and new wisdom will be offered. Most of those making predictions for the playing out of this era predict a total destruction of the earth and a rebirth of mankind. This is reflected not only in the prophesying stories, but in the symbols shown by the followers of those orchestrating the deception, like the phoenix, the Shiva, Pluto, and other ancient death and rebirth symbols. But ask yourself, how can we move on without defeating the fourth age challenges and learning to control ourselves and the unseen demonic forces that currently control us? The inversion of our language, reasoning, and right action will end when we stop cooperating, stop listening to the deceivers, and stop serving the powers that are controlled by the great evil that's oppressing mankind.